Ms. Arias, before we took a break, I believe we were talking about the point in time in your life when you got back together with Bobby Juarez.
Yes.
And from what I understood earlier, you were about 17 years of age when that took place. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you were talking about how he had called you, responded to your initial phone contact. Tell us how the relationship progressed from him making telephone contact with you.
Well, at the time I had a boyfriend. He lived in another country. So we corresponded. So it wasn't a romantic reason. Like I had said, I reached out to him for a spiritual reason. I don't know if he was seeing anybody at that time. I don't think he was. He used to call a party line a lot and meet people on that. I guess this was before the internet was really, in every single home.
Let me interrupt you a little bit there on a couple of different things. You said he made contact on a party line. What is that? Can you describe that for us?
From my understanding, I didn't talk on it, but from my understanding, it was a 900 number that you could call, and it's like a chat room, but it's on the telephone instead of on the computer.
And you chatted to Bobby that way, or he?
I didn't. He chatted with other people that way.
And you also mentioned, I don't want to get too far from it, you mentioned that when he made this contact with you, after the contact he made for what you described as spiritual reasons, you said that you had a boyfriend in another country, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that boyfriend's name?
Victor.
Did Victor have a last name?
Arias, ironically.
I'm sorry, what?
His last name was also Arias.
Okay. And where did you meet Victor Arias?
The summer that I turned 17, right before I turned 17, in July, I flew to Costa Rica on an exchange program, and I spent 3 weeks there with a family. Their name was also Arias, and they had 2 sons and 2 daughters in that family, and the oldest son was just a little older than me, and so we kind of clicked and got to know each other and sort of had a little romance kind of blossom thing. I don't know, it was like my first experience of like the warm fuzzies, somebody that I really felt that I cared for.
Okay, and that relationship lasted a few weeks, or tell me how it lasted beyond your being there.
It sort of began to develop while I was in Costa Rica, and I flew back toward the end of, I had my 17th birthday there in that country, and then I flew back near the end of July, and we corresponded and talked occasionally on the phone through August, and then he flew to the United States that September and stayed in Redding, which is a city about 100 miles south of Wairika. He had some people that he knew there. He stayed there about a week, I think, and then stayed at my house for 2 weeks before flying back.
And when did he come stay for you for 2 weeks? When was that?
That was early September 1997.
Okay. So this is about the time then that you were close to the time that you were in contact with Mr. Juarez as well, right?
Yes, it was just right before that.
Okay. And you considered Mr. Arias to be a boyfriend?
Yeah, actually he had given me a ring, and it was kind of a promise ring, like we were going to get married, but we weren't officially engaged. So we would talk about children and marriage, and he wanted me to come live down there and start a family.
Okay. You said it was your first experience of, I guess, what we call young love, right?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
I wouldn't say totally in love, but it was my first taste of being like, just feeling like warm about somebody, if that makes sense.
As it relates to your situation then, Mr. Arias, Victor, he goes back to Costa Rica, I assume, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then the relationship becomes one probably, is it primarily of letters, phone calls? Describe that for us.
Yeah, we wrote a lot. The postman actually got to know my name and face, and he would tease me every time I went to the post office to get it stamped to send to Costa Rica. And I would receive letters from him that were really romantic, and the Spanish language is very romantic, so he would write things like that, very romantic.
Okay, and relative to your age, how old was Victor?
I don't remember his exact age. I want to say he was about a year older than me. I think we were we were very close in age, but he was older than me.
Okay. Now, when you started interacting with Mr. Juarez again, we've heard from your earlier testimony that he became your boyfriend at a certain point in time when you were around 17 years old, right?
Yes.
Okay. Could you just kind of describe for us what happened in that time period when Victor was your boyfriend and then Bobby became your boyfriend?
Yes. Bobby and I would talk a few times a week, and then it became a little more frequent. Victor and I would, I couldn't see myself like moving to Costa Rica and having that kind of life and having children with him. We argued like over little silly things. Victor was very jealous, and so we would I couldn't talk to any of my high school friends that were guys. I went through the drive-through, and there was a classmate that I had gone to school with 2 years, over the years, and he had a job there, and I was driving, of course, because Victor was from out of the country, and we just were there to get ice cream. It was hot, and he gave us the ice cream, and we hadn't seen each other all summer, this person that served us, and the interaction I had with him, Victor didn't like it, so we argued over things like that. When we were in Costa Rica, he wanted me always to walk on the inside of on the sidewalk away from the street, and we were at a huge soccer game there. It's a very big deal there. They call it football, but it's soccer. And there was actually someone that walked by that looked a lot like Bobby, and it kind of reminded me of him at the time. He had long, dark, curly hair, and I glanced at him, and Victor got upset. So things like that, I just didn't see myself being in a marriage with him, so I broke up with him around October, maybe November, 1997, on the phone.
On the phone?
Yes.
Okay. After you broke up with Victor, did you continue seeing Mr. Juarez?
We weren't really seeing each other, we were just friends at that time, but we continued to talk.
Okay. When did the friendship move into something more, to be your boyfriend?
It was again around New Year's. I think we spent New Year's Eve. I had a car then, so we drove out to this little white chapel it's called Little Shasta. It's even smaller town. I don't even know if it's considered a town. And it's this small white chapel with a tall steeple, and there was snow everywhere. And we just kind of hung out there and rung in the New Year. Didn't really do it. I had began to develop feelings for him right before Christmas, and so I expressed that, and he said he had feelings for me too, and so we decided to give things another try at that point.
Okay. And this would have been a few months prior to you moving in with him. Is that right?
I believe I moved in with him in late April, and so we're around the New Year. So 4 months, 4.5, maybe 5.
Did your parents, were they aware of your relationship with, and I'm speaking as it relates to the occasion we're talking about now, when you're 17 or 17, excuse me. Did they know about your relationship with Mr. Juarez?
They knew about it. I don't know how they knew. I wasn't very open with them about my relationships because of prior negative experiences with regard to that. So somehow, it's a small town. I'm sure people told them they saw us running around or hanging out in the park or just walking around, and we hung out. So people would tell my mom and things like that.
Did you ever get any indication that your parents approved or disapproved of this relationship?
I didn't talk extensively with my dad about it, but my mom didn't like the fact that I was with him because she was basing her opinion on him off of rumors she had heard about him.
Okay. When you you described it in high school how you were working for your father at your father's restaurant, right?
Yes.
And you were in high school your junior year. All this was going on at the point in time when you were began dating Mr. Juarez, right?
I think my dad's restaurant closed the year prior when I was still a sophomore. I can't quite remember. No, I think he closed that spring. I think he closed that spring in 90, that would have been 98.
Okay.
I can't remember. It was
Did you-
sometime in high school he closed his restaurant.
Okay. Did you work elsewhere after that?
Yes.
Before you moved out?
Did I? Yes. I worked briefly as a hostess at a little restaurant called Grandma's House.
And during this point in time when you're a 17-year-old high school student, Mr. Juarez is out of school, are you supplying him with money at this point in time before you've left school?
Yes. Well, he lived with two people he called mom and dad. I think they were his grandparents. Bobby said he was adopted, so his real parents, it was kind of, I never really met them. But he lived with them. They would be his mom and dad, by definition. So I think they were just supplying, clothing and shelter and food and that kind of thing at that point.
Okay. So going back to my question, were you supplying Mr. Juarez with money at this point in time?
At this point, no.
Okay. Then you leave high school and you move in with Mr. Juarez, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. In the
Okay.
spring.
And you mentioned that he was living with persons you believe to be his grandparents, his
Yes.
adopted grandparents.
I don't know if they were really related or if he just called them his parents. But if anything, they were more like his grandparents, but he called them mom and dad.
You say that because of their age, as opposed
Yeah, they were
to...
very much older. I actually saw who everyone around town kind of knew was his mother, but he didn't want anything to do with her, and she was more appropriate age to be his mother. And these people were more like in their 70s, late 70s maybe.
Okay. When you spoke about your first relationship with Mr. Juarez, you spoke about his desire to move to San Francisco and chase vampires and be with you forever, and how he dressed in a goth style. Was that 15-year-old Bobby the same way he was when you got back together with him?
No, he was 20 now. He was a little more mature, but he still had that eccentricity about him. He had a flair. For Halloween, he would dress up as the character played by Brandon Lee from The Crow, with the white face and all black leather and all that. So it was a Halloween thing, but he really got into that, and he did it pretty well, actually. So he was still drawn to that, and part of that was fascinating to me. I thought he was beautiful on the inside and out, and I was attracted to him in that regard. And but he was a little more down to earth at this point.
Earlier you were describing for us a situation where you were taking some of your possessions and moving it into Mr. Juarez's home, and now eventually you moved out.
Yes.
Okay. What was the last straw for you to move out of your house?
I think the last straw was actually when they said you're grounded until you're 18. And a lot of my things were already at Bobby's house or his parents' house. They were putting it in a storage shed right behind the house. Just boxes of things that I had been saving because I knew I was going to be on my own soon. My dad had recently closed his restaurant. He let me have a lot of the plates, the dishes, the silverware. So that would just get me started. So things like that. Old books I'd already read but didn't want to part with, things like that went to the storage shed. And then when I was grounded, I thought, I only have a few more things to throw in the car plus my cat. So I stayed up all night packing while my parents slept. And my dad, when he would ground me, he used to unhook my car. I don't know what that means, but I would go out and try to turn the engine and it wouldn't turn. He unhooked something under the hood, and I think I figured out how to rehook it, so then he started taking the entire piece so that I couldn't rehook it. So the first thing I did was I went out after they went to sleep to check if my car would start, and it did, so I was relieved. So I began to load up the car. I was almost completely packed, and then I think around 4:30 or 5, I heard one of my parents awake. So I was in the living room, still packing up a few things, and I jumped on the couch real quick to pretend like I was sleeping so they wouldn't wonder why I was awake. And I was very tired, so I ended up falling asleep. And the next thing I knew, it was 7:30 or 7 o'clock, and my mom was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. And I thought, oh shoot, I missed my opportunity. But I just went into my bedroom, found my cat, picked her up, and I just started walking out the door. My mom said, what are you doing? And I said, nothing. And I just shut the door and put my cat in my car and drove out to Bobby's house, unloaded it, and then went to school that day.
And you say Bobby's house. These people you described as his grandparents, did they live in this home as well?
Yes.
Okay. And was there anyone else besides them and Bobby in this home?
No.
Okay. Describe for us the environment you were leaving your home with your parents in order to live with Bobby. What were you moving to?
It was, structurally the house was very good, but it was in very bad shape. His parents were very heavy smokers, so there was always a haze hanging out in the living room, and there was a lot of, I don't know what it's called, I guess tar or something running down the walls, kind of in a deep brown. The living room was almost, not quite to the ceiling, but it was packed with a bunch of things. I don't know what it was, just various odds and ends. I guess they were hoarders. Bobby did the best to make his bedroom his own little space, but he wasn't allowed to touch any of those things while they were there. And so, I mean, the kitchen was very, very dirty. The bathroom was very dirty. The linoleum was coming off the floor, and the shower was kind of falling apart, and it was just a mess. All of the yard all around the house was overgrown. I went back to my parents' house a few days later to borrow their cleaning supplies for it.
Doesn't sound like Bobby's house was a great place to live.
No, he hated it. Like I said, his own room, he did his best to make that his space and make it habitable. And then his parents would kind of sit in the living room all day and watch TV and smoke till they went to bed.
You mentioned he kept his room in a different way. Was that a room you shared with him?
Yes.
Were you having a sexual relationship with him at that point in time?
I'm trying to remember if we were at that point. We did eventually. I don't remember if it was right before I moved in with him. I think it was right after I moved in with him. I can't remember. We waited several months.
Okay. So from what you're telling us then is that you moved into this home, this filthy home with one clean room in it. You dropped out of high school and you were working, right?
Sorry, will you repeat that?
At this point in time when you moved in with Bobby, you were at the end of your junior year, and that was your last school.
Yes, I was
right?
coming up on the end of my junior year.
And you were working as well, I believe you said, at Grandma's? if I heard you
Yes, my
correctly.
dad had recently closed his restaurant, and I think I got a part-time position there at Grandma's house.
Okay. And was this how you were supporting yourself?
Yes, it was.
And were you supporting Mr. Juarez as well?
Not quite yet. Occasionally we'd go on a date, and I, of course, would pay for it, which wasn't a big deal to me at the time. He had a problem getting identification to prove that he was legally able to work in the United States. So he didn't have a photo ID. He couldn't find a copy of his birth certificate. He didn't have a social security card, but he did have a social security number. But every time we went to the DMV or the social security office or the courthouse, they wanted one form of identification that we were trying to get. So of those three, it was hard to get all of them. So he couldn't, that was the reason he couldn't work, or so. That was what I understood.
Okay. So based on what you told us earlier then, at the end of your junior year, you drop out of high school and you begin working full-time to support yourself, right?
Yes, Bobby and I went to Chico, California briefly, which is near Sacramento. It's a little bit south, I think. I was going to work there. I was going to live there. It didn't work out. We were there for about a week. And we went back. And so then I applied at a restaurant I applied at Denny's, actually. And the woman there that gave me a good reference had worked for my dad the previous year, her and her husband. So I was hired there around, I think, August 2000. Wait, I'm sorry. That would be 1998.
And are you working full-time?
Yes, I am. Was.
Okay. And is that the only job you had, or did you have another?
I didn't, I'm sorry, I forgot, because in between that, I did have a brief job at this restaurant called the Purple Plum. I was a busser. I worked there briefly before thinking I was going to move to Chico, and then I came back and began to work at Denny's.
So working at Denny's, was this how you were supporting yourself and Mr. Juarez?
Yes, that became our income.
Were you making a lot of money?
Well, the cost of living wasn't very high. I would say no, but we were making ends meet because I didn't have rent or mortgage. At that point, his parents had moved out and into a rest home. So we had the kind of run of the house and cleaned it up a little and, discovered just things about the house that we didn't know about before because it was so cluttered.
Well, who was paying for the phone? Who was paying for the power?
Not me. I don't know. I guess I really don't know. The phone was there, the power was there. I think his parents were still paying for it.
Okay.
I don't know.
Were you giving Bobby money to buy food, or how was that?
Yes, I went grocery shopping. I started buying him a few clothes. At one point, the power did shut off in the winter.
The power was shut off.
Yeah, it was shut off briefly.
So how did you get by? Were you able to get it turned back on? How did that work?
We had a furnace and we used candles for a while. It was very cold. I don't remember how they got the power on, but Bobby had a friend or knew somebody that he had come over to the house and he tinkered with a meter on the side of the house and then we had power again. So.
At this point in time, life doesn't seem like it was very ideal.
No, but it was, I enjoyed the freedom. We just played it by ear. I got moved to the graveyard shift at Denny's after some months there. And so we all became night owls, me and Bobby and all of our circle of friends that we socialized with.
At this point in time, how did Bobby treat you?
I thought he treated me well until I discovered that he wasn't being faithful.
And when in your relationship did you discover that?
He was on the party line a lot, and he talked to this woman frequently. He said they were just friends. They had been interested in each other in the past, but they decided they were just friends. It made me a little uncomfortable. He would talk to her a lot, actually, in my presence, so I figured he's doing it right in front of me. There's nothing going on there. So then one day we went to the library. That's where we went for our internet access, and he would email her a lot. And I had to go to work at the Purple Plum, and I dropped him off at his friend's house, and I went to go to the Purple Plum. And before going to the Purple Plum, I went back to the library, and I clicked. He had a Hotmail account. This is in 1998. So I clicked I don't know if they had different security things for Hotmail at that point, but I clicked the back button to see what was really going on with her because I had suspicions, and I found a whole bunch of love letters that he was writing her that were all contemporaneous with the time that we were together. So I printed them out, and I called in sick for work because I was not well emotionally, and I drove back out to his friend's house, and I didn't want to create a scene of drama, so I just said, "Can I talk to you?" And so we went into the bathroom, And I pulled them out of my pocket and handed them to him, and he opened them up and read them, and he kind of felt like shocked.
Kind of glossed over it a little bit. When you saw these letters, how did it make you feel?
It didn't make me feel good. He was very loving and poetic with this person, and I could tell he had real feelings for her, and I don't know, I guess I felt jealous a little bit, but my heart was pounding. I just felt very deceived. I forgot to mention one of the things I did before I went to the house is I drove back out to Montague, and I took all of my belongings out of his room and put them in my car, and decided I was going to move out and in with my grandmother. So that's when I went back to his house and confronted him with those.
Okay.
Or I mean, back to the friend's house, sorry.
You mentioned that he was this woman, whoever it was that he was corresponding with, that he was treating her in a very loving, poetic way.
Yes.
It leads to the implication, anyway, that he wasn't that way to you.
He was initially, but I don't know. I guess we had just sort of gotten comfortable around each other, and we weren't fighting or anything. We were just kind of, I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it. He was still loving toward me, but it seemed like he was going out of his way to really court her, whereas I was already, in the bag, so to speak.
You were already, what was that?
Just like he didn't have to court me. I was already with him. Does that make sense?
Okay, yes. Was Bobby ever physically abusive towards you?
There was one time where we had a fight. Trying to think, I think this was in '99. We had broken up and got back together a few times. I broke up with him, obviously, after that incident, and then he somehow, it's a long story, but he convinced me to stay, so I stayed and put all my things back, and he promised he wouldn't have contact with her anymore. But we broke up a few more times and then got back together, and at one point, I had moved out of his house and I was living with another woman, and it wasn't far from his house. It was like 2 blocks. And in Montague, there's a lot of fields. We could see each other's houses from there, sort of. And so I was advised over and over to get away from him because he's not healthy. But my heart was, I still cared about him. So one day he came over to the house, like he always did, and we were hanging out. And I don't remember how, but an argument started, and
objection, foundations,
sustained.
When was this?
This was sometime in 1999. I think it was in the fall, early fall, like September, maybe even August, but I think it was around sometime in the early fall.
Okay. And he was at the home. Was he physical with you at this acquaintance's home?
Yes, our argument escalated, and he approached me and spun me around, and he was very much into martial arts, so he had some kind of hold. I guess it was called a stranglehold. So he started strangling me, and just for a few seconds, and then he let go. I almost passed out. I fell on my knees, and it kind of made me upset because he'd never done that before. So I got up. He started walking away. I got up, and I said something to him like, what did I say? Something to the effect of, my family would be very upset if they found out what you just did. And then he began to describe in detail how he would kill each member of my family. He knew a lot about my family, so these were all very personalized details about how they would die. And at that point, the argument escalated again, and he attacked me again. I don't know how, he jumped on me, and at that point I was trying to get to the phone to call 911, and he got my arm in some kind of lock and was putting pressure on my forearm, and I thought he might break it, because that seemed to be what the goal was. So I managed to grab the phone and I called 911, and he grabbed it out of my hand and hung up, and I was crying, and he kept telling me to shut up, because they were going to call back. So he was right. The phone rang and he answered, and he gave the operator an excuse, like said my girlfriend was trying to program 911 into the speed dial and accidentally called it.
This happened, and then you got back together with him, right? Or you didn't really break up? This happened in
This was really, I'm sorry, this was really toward the end of our relationship. This was really toward the end. It didn't happen. We didn't stay together much longer after that.
But you did stay together after that, right?
We continued to hang out. He met a friend that he had known prior to. His name was Matt, and he moved in with Matt. And this was in...
Let me ask you this. Why did you stay together with him after this incident?
Well, I don't know that we were still together, but he would still come over to the house where I lived. And it was just a nicer place to hang out than his. And I just continued to hang out with him in that regard.
Why would you hang out with him in that regard?
Well, the physical incident that occurred that day, those two things were isolated, and during all the years that I'd known him, that had never happened before, so I just didn't think that it was something, a pattern of his, or that would continue.
Did you ever engage in sexual behavior with him after this incident?
I don't remember, maybe once or twice. I don't remember, honestly.
And why was that okay with you after this incident?
I still loved him.
You mentioned a point in time when Bobby moved in with an individual named Matt.
Yes.
Okay. And I believe you were talking about how at the end of your relationship with Bobby, you moved into your grandparents' home, correct?
Yes. I moved out of that woman's house and into my grandmother's house.
And what city is your grandmother's house located in?
Wairika.
And did you live there just with your grandmother, or was anyone else living there with you?
My grandfather also lived there, and their dog, Ringo.
Were you close to your grandparents? How was your relationship with them?
I felt close to my grandparents, not like lovey-dovey close, but they're very down-to-earth people. Well, my grandmother is very down-to-earth, and I can just tell her anything, and it doesn't really faze her.
Why didn't you move back in with your parents?
Well, I didn't want to go back to that environment. We got along very well after I moved out, and I wanted to keep it that way.
Okay. Tell us about your life after you moved back to your grandparents' home. Are you still working at Denny's? Do you go back to school? Just kind of describe your life for us.
Yes. After that incident occurred with Bobby, I had worked at Denny's for about a year at that point, and if you're a full-time employee at Denny's, or I think a minimum of like 32 hours a week, you get vacation benefits, and so I decided to use that time to spend away from him, and I flew back to Costa Rica for a week and a half.
And am I correct in assuming that was to spend time with Victor?
No, he didn't live in the house anymore. I stayed with the same family, but he had moved out and moved on.
So you spent about a week and a half, it sounds like, with Victor's family, not with him.
Yes.
And kind of assessing your life, is that?
Yeah, I
fair
spent
to
a lot
say?
of time just reflecting and healing from that, and I felt in a lot better place by the time I came back. I did see Victor 3 days before I flew back. So he took me out to dinner, and that was it, and then drove me to the airport.
When you say healing from that, what are you talking about? Healing from the relationship with Bobby?
Yes, because we kept going back, and I kept hearing about incidents where he was trying to hook up with other girls, but then he would deny it, and I didn't see anything, so there was just a lot of turmoil. We were arguing still, and then the physical incident that happened there, and I needed to just remove myself from the situation so that I could allow my heart to move on a little. And so that break from him, I thought, had helped me a lot.
So at some point in time, you were in love with Bobby, right?
Yes, very much. A lot more than I was Victor. Bobby was like my first true love.
Okay. So once you have spent some time in Costa Rica and you've, I guess, used your vacation time at Denny's, you come back to Wairika, I presume?
Yes, I did.
And how do you proceed in your life?
I went back to work, and I don't know if he was watching the restaurant, but the first day back, I was there. I went into the back of the restaurant to get something, and I came back out, and he was sitting at the counter.
He being who?
Bobby.
Okay.
He just had his face in his hands, and he has really beautiful eyes, and he was looking at me with these eyes, these puppy dog eyes, and I stopped, and I was kind of shocked. I felt stronger emotionally, not as weak, but I was coming up on my half-hour break, so I said, just wait a few minutes, and we'll go outside and talk. So I went outside, and we ended up talking for a long time. I mean, we rounded the corner and then hugged, and it was emotional and that kind of thing.
Okay. But was that the last time you saw Bobby?
No.
Okay. Did you continue in a relationship with him after that?
We decided we were going to continue a relationship, but we weren't getting along very well.
And I use the word relationship. Are we talking about friendship or a romantic relationship?
Romantic.
Did that also mean sexual?
It would have meant that. I don't really remember, but yeah, it would have meant that.
Okay. So why at this point in time were you still open to the idea of a romantic and potentially sexual relationship with a man who had choked you and thrown you down as you described?
Well, like I said, I considered those incidents isolated and not a pattern of his, and I still loved him, and he still loved me, and I didn't want to hurt him, and I didn't want to. It just felt natural. I'd been with him for some years. He was my first love. Being with him, whether it was good or bad, it just felt natural, and it was what I was accustomed to.
Okay. So at what point in time then do you decide, you said you and Bobby explored this and decided it wasn't for the best? When does that take place?
There was sort of a turning point in my mind. Well, Costa Rica was like a good starting point where I thought I'd moved on. If I hadn't seen him again, I think I would have been okay as far as never seeing him again. But I was weak when he came back, and so we sort of picked up again briefly. He moved to Medford, Oregon shortly thereafter. It's about 50 miles north of Wairika. And he moved in with Matt. And I would go up there and visit Bobby, and we'd hang out. And it seemed like once Bobby got on his feet, he didn't really want anything to do with me. And so it hurt my feelings, I guess, because he had kind of won me back, and I was helping him. But then when he got on his feet, he was kind of mean.
What do you mean you were helping him?
Well, I always helped him out until he was able to get it. He finally got a job when he moved to Medford. There was a woman he knew that was a notary public that grew up with him in school, so she was able to say this is really who he is, so he could get identification. We finally figured that out, and so.
Let me interrupt him. I want to make sure we're clear here. Even after the incident, what you were describing as a isolated incident of violence, even after the point in time when you find letters that are evidence that he's being unfaithful with you, and you come back from Costa Rica, you're going to move on, you've decided a romantic relationship isn't going to work, are we to understand that you're still supporting him financially as well? Or helping him?
Think that was a little bit out of order, but I did continue to help him. When I found out about the love letters, he promised to cut ties with her and not have any contact with her anymore. And it wasn't physical, it was online only. She lived in Louisiana. And I think he was still talking to her, but he promised me, you'll never have to see me talking to her. So it was implied that he might talk to her, but he'll never do it in my presence. So it was kind of strange. But, and then again, the physical incident was isolated. So, you know, if he needed clothing, I didn't like buy him a whole wardrobe. I didn't have that kind of income. But if he needed a few shirts or something, he was really into South Park. So he saw these South Park t-shirts one time and he wanted those. So I bought them, sweatshirt, jeans, that kind of thing. Just some kind of clothing for him because his parents weren't able to provide that at that point. They were in a rest home.
Okay. And you said at this point in time, Bobby was living in Medford, Oregon with an individual named Matt, right?
Yes.
Okay. And just so we can get a sense of where this is compared to Wairika, could you describe for us where Medford is compared to Wairika?
Yes, it's on Interstate 5, just like Wairika. It's over the border. It's about an hour drive, I think 50 miles, but it takes about an hour to get there depending on traffic
Okay.
and the weather.
And I'm certainly not asking for population estimates, but is this a bigger town than Wairika?
It's a bigger town, not nearly as big as this area. It's very tiny in comparison, but it's much bigger than Wairika.
And you made trips up to Medford to see Bobby, is that right?
Yes, I would come up there on the weekend and stay. Bobby had a futon. They had kind of a studio, so Matt slept in his own bed, and Bobby and I had a futon. And we would hang out on the weekends and go out and do things.
Okay. And how many of these trips can you say? I mean, was this something you did every weekend? How frequently did you go up to spend time with Bobby?
I went up several times, but that period of our relationship was short-lived, so that didn't happen often. I mean, very extensively.
Okay. And this person, Matt, that he was roommates with, had you known Matt prior to these trips up to Medford?
No.
Okay. And does Matt have a last name?
McCartney.
Did you ever develop any sort of friendship or relationship with him?
Yes, we became friends around the time. I think he kind of noticed how Bobby was treating me, and it felt good to have somebody else kind of see my side of it. He wasn't attacking Bobby by any means, like saying, hey, you should be this way or that. But it just, you know, I came up there one weekend to visit, and another girl came to visit Matt, and it was a real eye-opener because I saw how Matt was treating her, and he was very chivalrous and very polite, and he was a gentleman, and he just treated her with a lot of respect, and that's not something I had received, but, you know, I've seen it on TV and that kind of thing. So it was just jarring to see that, and then consider my relationship. So,
Well, let me ask you this. You said that was surprising for you to see, right?
yes,
And that is in a way that you experienced Bobby treating you. Is that right?
no, yes, that's right.
But you lived with your parents for 17 years, the first 17 years of your life, right?
Yes.
Did you not see your father treat your mother in this way? Did they treat each other in a different manner?
When I was young, my father was very affectionate with my mom. I've seen them kiss, I've seen them embrace. If there's a beautiful woman on TV and we're all sitting around watching it, he'll say she's not as pretty as your mom. Or, you know, he put her on a sort of a pedestal, sort of. But then there were times when they would argue and fight, things like that.
You say argue and fight. What does that mean?
Not physical. They would just, well, sometimes. I mean, he would say something. My dad's very sarcastic, and he thinks he's funny, and sometimes he is. But he can be very uncouth sometimes, and so when things would come out of his mouth, my mom would just smack him on the arm, and he would smack her back, kind of as a way to say, don't do that. And then she would be offended by that, so she would smack him back, and then he'd smack her even harder, and then she would give up. But it was just on the arm, but, you know, that's the only time I ever saw them be physical at all.
Did you know, how did your father treat your mother? Was he degrading to her? Did he criticize her?
I can't recall specific incidents, but that's very much my dad. He's very negative. He's very critical. He's very gossipy.
Very, what was that?
I don't know if that's a word, gossipy. He gossips a lot about people
Okay.
behind their back. He talks about them. So, I mean, he'll say things about, now we talk on the phone now, and he'll say things about my mom sometimes, or sometimes they have complaints about each other, but, you know, they're still loyal to each other.
Well, what do you mean things he would say about your mom? What things would he complain about with your mother?
Sexual hearsay, no.
Goes to modeling
Approach.
behavior.
Approach. May continue.
Without telling me specifically what he said, was there certain subject matters that your dad would degrade your mother regarding?
One I recall specifically is my mother used to be very thin, and I think she's like a size 10 now, I would guess. He used to put up photos of her on the refrigerator when she was thinner, and he would make comments about her weight gain. And just, he would put little things like that around the house to remind her that he would prefer her with less weight, things like that. So I don't know how that affected her, but that was pretty constant. If somebody was crossing the crosswalk that was overweight, he would yell at them, and I won't say what he said, but I don't know, things like that.
Okay. But you said your mother would just simply, you said something to the effect, you learned they were always loyal to each other.
Yes.
Your mom was always loyal to your dad. What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, my parents weren't the kind where if one said no, you couldn't run to the other and have a different answer. Maybe if they weren't aware of their spouse's answer, but they were very united. If we were fighting, it didn't matter the points of the argument. My dad would side with my mom, or my mom would side with my dad at all times. So they were like one unit. They were very united. They're very loyal. And I think when I was younger, I think I heard my mom mention the word divorce one time, and that really like shook me, because I thought it just didn't seem, I couldn't imagine a world where my parents weren't married. And so they're still married today. I mean, even through bad times, they're still together. They still love each other.
Well, I should have been more clear in my question. You talked about loyalty as parents and backing each other up and that sort of thing. But what I was really asking about is in terms of the loyalty of the relationship. It sounds like from what you're telling us, your mom put up with a fair amount and remained loyal to your dad. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes. Yeah. They're very loyal. They're still married. They've been married about 33 and a half years. My grandparents are married. There's not a very high divorce rate in my family. So they're still together.
Okay. We were talking about this different way Matt McCartney was treating a female. I guess it was his girlfriend or someone he was dating. Is that correct?
I think it's somebody he had met online, or somehow. She lived in Crescent City. And she just came out for the weekend the same time I came out to see Bobby. And nothing ever really progressed with that. They didn't start dating or anything like that. They just hung out for the weekend, and I just saw how he was treating her.
Okay. Tell me how things then progressed in your life. Did you just keep working? Did your life change at all?
I wanted to work in an environment where I could earn a little bit more money. I needed a new car. There were different kinds of bills coming in at this point. And Medford is a town that has a lot more restaurants, a lot more business, that kind of thing. So as I got to know Matt and Bobby, Matt's mother lives in Wairika too, so I met her and his sister, and we all sort of became friends. And Matt's dad lived in a city called Phoenix. It's in just south of Medford, and it's in Oregon. And he lived with his girlfriend, Matt's dad, and they had an extra. Well, they said just come crash on our couch until you can get a job and get your own place. So I crashed on Matt's dad's couch where he and his girlfriend lived for, I don't remember how long, maybe a month, and I got a job at Applebee's and began to work there.
Okay. So, did you then move out of your grandparents' house and move to Medford? Just tell us about that.
Yes. Right around the time I moved to Medford, Bobby and I stopped talking. I was hanging out with him and his sister and her son. And they were renting a house right across the street from my parents' house. So I was over there hanging out with them, and Bobby came by and saw Matt and I, and